The Why Didn't You Test That podcast want to improve your software. Join Hugh, Rich, and their guests. They share experiences and insights on the many sides of better software delivery.
Hi everyone, it's Hugh and Rich again, and today we are joined by Gunesh Patil, aka the Liberated Tester. He has his own podcast called Liberated Tester. I would basically encourage you to have a listen at that. He's spoken at lots of conferences and obviously a keen interest in model-based testing. Currently works for a company called Ushur. I would encourage you to go and have a look at their website. I was just having a browse around. It looks quite intriguing. So the reason Gunesh is on is that Rich and Gunesh have a bit of a shared history here. They worked together for a couple of years at a previous company that Rich worked at, which we all know was Nationwide, because we've mentioned it about 7,000 times here. So I don't think we need to hide that. So it's not really a big secret. And also most of the stuff you're talking about, Rich, is actually is out on the web, and there's lots of lovely presentations that Nationwide have done. And Nationwide are a very good company in terms of trying to help other companies and basically push their good practices out to the wider community. And Rich was actually pretty sort of influential in that period. So hopefully today, I'm not going to say much for a change, which is good. I'm going to leave it up to Rich and Gunesh to just kind of go back and forth. I think sort of model-based design, model-based testing was kind of where you two bonded. And it's probably this one is going to be more about the journey. You get a lot of resistance, a lot of misunderstanding, a lot of misconceptions, a lot of people being too busy chopping down trees to do anything differently, etc. But over time, you two managed to achieve some pretty amazing stuff and did actually create transformational change in a medium-sized organization and with a complex set of systems, which quite a lot of them are familiar with, and they are a true mixture of the new, the wonderful, the amazing, and lots and lots and lots of legacy and lots of different methodologies. So, Gunesh, do you want to just kind of set your stall out a little bit, and then probably I'm going to mute out a little bit, and then you and Rich can kind of move more into kind of a conversational chat. Off you go.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you for the wonderful introduction. Like you said, Rich and I go back, 2014, I think. That's when I actually started. So I was at IBM, and then I started on the Nationwide as a client project. And I think at that time, I was more into the actual automation project. So we had a team called Dave. It's a sort of a different acronym. I think Richard has already talked about it a couple of times, the journey of the dev. So it was more like data automation and virtual environments. So it was like the whole package. And that was after a couple of months, I had interaction with Richard. So we had very similar thought process of approaching a particular problem. And he was always looking out ways for challenging things on if we are doing it this way, why not do it that way? And let me tell you, he's a big stickler for numbers. So he likes his numbers. So we went through a lot of matrix and trying to make sense of what's happening and how we can go forward with incremental approaches. I think that was one of the key factors that I learned while working with Rich, and that was really amazing way of looking at things. So that was a different perspective altogether, which I had.
If I can just pitch in, I think we have a bit of a shared journey and therefore mindset, thoughts, beliefs, and almost I think it's a good representation of I say we worked in Dave, and I think you were 2014. I think Dave became a thing kind of pre-2010, where the trend was very much around centralized capabilities around automation, data, things like that, right? And whilst things like data, it makes sense, inevitably, over time, it doesn't make sense for there to be a separate automation team that does automation and then delivers into another team, right? both in terms of an organisational model, but also almost the provocation. I think we have a shared belief in that is automation enough, right? In terms of, Hugh, you mentioned all of the challenges and disparate kind of lovely technologies that we've got, be that old or be it new. Fundamentally, if those foundations are not there, and a lot of the time, I think we found that, anti-patterns coming out all over the place here, but we would consume test cases from teams, right? And we would automate them, and we would hand them back to the team to run. And first step is they didn't know how to run them, and therefore they would fall over. Okay, so we'll come in and run them for you. That's one anti-pattern. Next anti-pattern, we would come in and run them for them, and they'd still fail. Okay, something else is wrong. And very quickly you get into the weeds of, this isn't an automation problem necessarily, although we've gone and explored lots of different tools. Actually, there is something more fundamental in terms of what do the test cases actually do? And also, it's not just what do the test cases do, but where are those test cases derived from in terms of oracles that we're gathering? And I think to our evolution, if you like, I think there's a plotted timeline between almost, I think you're starting in the team, Dave, where we very much sat like that into when you were kind of in your pomp, if you like, at Nationwide. You were federated into a capability, and therefore you had a dotted line into what was the central DaveOps capability. But almost you had the belief, the momentum, the movement, if you like, around everything that almost DaveOps and modeling and all that good stuff had to do. But yet you were dotted line rather than, almost, I only do this because my manager says. No, that almost became a belief. I think that's almost a shared experience in terms of, for me personally, how do you roll out teams? How I would answer that question is very different today than if you would have asked me the question in 2014, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, so I remember an incident where we were working with the bunch of SAP guys who had their test cases written all in like shiny ALM thing. And then they wanted all that to be automated. So we actually had to have an intermediary with me and one more person, and we would actually get them in a terms where automation team can understand them. So they were not straightforward. They were like, okay, this is what SAP term I know, and you go and automate it. I don't know how. So that's why we needed an intermediary who would translate it to. So we used to have like sheets and sheets of Excels with all those test cases on how they would translate to the actual automation, because two people knew automation, how it works, but other people didn't know SAP, how it works. So we were kind of the bridge in between. And I think from there, the need for the business and the actual translation to the use cases, that actually kind of took place. And that always has got me thinking like how we can simplify that process so that the whole churn and the whole amount of efforts that we waste into going to and fro between business and our technology, how we can minimize that. And I think model-based testing, the introduction to it was kind of a segue into that, because that was the exact thing that maybe I was looking for to translate those efforts into something really quick, really fruitful, and something which can showcase what an automation capability can do if they have the right set of tests. So that was kind of the way my mindset also shifted into looking at things differently. And when we actually started in middleware, where there was a lot of API focus, right? So in APIs, I remember that one incident where there was, so we had that mainframe, right, which was Unisys, was it? I think Unisys, yeah. So we had one particular API where it used to behave differently if you pass a blank value to a tag, or if you don't pass the tag at all. So it's usually taken care inside the API, but this API was kind of a legacy thing and it was not meant to handle that. And we used to have different behaviors based on that. So writing test cases for every time you're sending those headers was a big no, right? So that's when the introduction to model-based testing, the whole flow-based visual thing was really helpful in getting those reusable components out of our way and then just plug it into the flow and then don't just worry about it. So that was a driving factor for the efficiency in that particular area as well.
I think was the middleware project your first exposure to model-based testing? Or did it come before that? Because obviously,
that was the most effective introduction to model-based testing, is what I would say.
Because I think there's an interesting, almost dynamic coming together in terms of not just a technology need, but almost playing the organisational, dare I say it, politics, but the organisational drivers around working with an SI. We were as an organisation driving for cost savings, more efficiency, more an increase in automation. And I think the interesting part there is, as a middleware capability, there's a lot of automation tools in there, right? But yet the numbers, and this is probably where I got that interest in numbers from, the numbers didn't reflect the fact that all of these capabilities were there, right? And so, in order to test middleware, you need to have some kind of tool to trigger a service, right? And therefore, it's not a major leap from a technology perspective to say, okay, so if you need to use a tool, you're 50% there to doing automation anyway. So what's missing? Right, and I think it comes back to actually it's the underlying understanding of what the system is doing. I think as a central capability going to federate capabilities in test, if you go back to what I was saying earlier on, I think we saw that as a really interesting opportunity to demonstrate the benefit of not just automation, but it through modeling, right? And I think it would be fair to say that our stakeholders weren't really interested in what we did to get there. They were just interested in the outcome. And the outcome they thought they wanted was improved automation. The actual outcome they got was a far better understanding of outcomes, risks, etc., etc. So just tell us about kind of your early days within said middleware capability. And by that I mean the legacy middleware rather than a newer place, if you don't mind.
Oh, okay. So I think when I started with the legacy middleware, it was, first of all, the understanding and the documentation was really low. There were very couple of key people who actually knew what's going on inside the whole middleware and the whole how the connections are. And people, there was slight a bit of apathy towards understanding the actual things which are ongoing. And because it was a legacy thing, it was all working fine. Nobody really cared on what the response times we are getting, what all the other data combinations we can pass. So most of the times it boiled down to, okay, do we have this customer in production? Okay, we do. Then it makes sense to have that particular case run. Otherwise, it's all good. We don't really have to worry about. So that was slight. That was the concern that I saw when I first went there into that legacy middleware kind of a project, and it was really hard to navigate through all the cases, because you don't, once you don't know the internals, you can't really say it's actually a black box. It's supposed to be a gray box for us, right? But it actually became a black box. I would even call it a black hole sometimes, because once you send it in, you never know if you'll get it back or not. So that was the condition of the things that we had. But then when I started connecting with people who knew things, who were really knowledgeable about the adapters which were written on top of those mainframes and how they interact and all these things. So there was some old documentation that we went through as a team, and then we formulated a plan around, okay, this is what we know right now, and if we put it in a better representation, then maybe people will understand and they'll have bit more enthusiasm towards understanding these things, and then start putting some effective data, some effective tests around it. And also look around for the ways where we reduce the dependency on these mainframes, because each request response that you're getting is actually being charged. So you are actually paying for it. It's not like anything just running in a MySQL, which will, let it run for 1 million times. It's fine. It's not like that when you are dealing with mainframes. So that was one more concern because me being from a vendor side, these kind of metrics were slightly more valuable for the leadership, where we save efforts, where we save cost, and how we can minimize the efforts that we are putting in. And sadly it always boiled down to saying, okay, if we are doing it in 4 FTE, can we do it in 2 FTE? So can we do 2 people rather than 4 people? How can we do it? So, which is a good thing to do in terms of optimization, but then
but it can cause the wrong behaviors, can't it? That's the problem.
Yes,
and therefore you might get short-term benefit, but long-term you might be cutting it too thin, or actually you're not getting any benefit long-term.
Yeah. So in long run, it actually hampers your whole productivity thing. So a thing that another side road which can help you with that is the thing that you said, right? The overall federated capability, which had that control in them, and then they would drive the approach, and then they would actually influence the people who are around to look at it from a new approach and look at it from a new light, and then drive it forward so that you would sustain that gain. It's not just like, okay, for these 3 months you did this and then it's all gone. So that, I think that was one of the major area why we were able to sustain that change that we tried to bring in. And to be really frank with you, when I started, I didn't know ABC of Ready API when I started. So that was a completely new tool for me. And I was like, I actually never did a concentrated API testing, and this is a new tool. How would I do it? But yeah, to my surprise, Ready API really lived up to the expectation of being a premium paid tool, and it was really good in the way it was doing. And there was a slight bit of transformation journey on the Ready API side as well, where we tried to templatize things the way we were doing it in our other representations. So, and that also paid off.
Just touching on that part, I think there's almost a fundamental Icecreams and volcanoes bit going on there, right?
Yes.
I think you mentioned, the black box.
Yeah.
And so I think it's interesting, and there's an anti-pattern quite a lot of people we talk to, right? And that they've got middleware, microservices and things like that, but yet there's this big end-to-end event when it comes to testing.
Yeah.
And so there's a big problem there in that technology is essentially there to allow you to break up your organizational architecture, right? And so there's got to be a question of why are you doing so much end-to-end testing when that breakpoint is actually there? And I think one of the big problems, again, from a test approach point of view, there's apathy around what was there already, and therefore we used to test this as a black box before middleware came in, and we'll continue to do it like that.
Yeah.
But I think there's also the problem of the tooling and the techniques to actually analyze services, be that experience. You said you were new to SOAP UI. I think that extends into how do you actually test an API, right? But also, then there's how do you get the working practices in place to get the architect or the designer to say, actually, because we've got this breakpoint in there, do I need to do anything past this stage? Just elaborate on kind of. I think one of the things you did very effectively is almost span the different disciplines in that area to have those kind of conversations to minimize as much as possible the amount of end-to-end we did, but also inevitably where things weren't understood, where we needed to go and address those things. Do you want to expand on that?
Yes, absolutely. So when we were actually trying to do all these things, right? So like you really mentioned, the overall end-to-end kind of mindset which was there, like you have to, any release or any change that happens, okay, these are the set of 50 cases which will always run irrespective of what the change is, whether it is impacting it or not, we will still run it. And and everything passes, we are all good. But that impact analysis part of it was never part of the scoping, I believe, because even if they did an impact analysis, so let's say, for example, we had a payload of so let's say we had a payload of 50 odd tags, and for those 50 odd tags, 2 of them got changed, and they would still run that whole end-to-end pack without even realizing that that coverage is not even there. So that actually brings out the question on the overall product knowledge they had. And once we acknowledge that, okay, this is the gap we have in our current process, that we don't understand it fully, so then we started going to people who have been there in Nationwide for like 20, 30, 40 years, who know these things well. So I think we had a couple of sessions with them. We had so we had one session with the designers, we had one with the developers who were seasoned in that area. We also had a chat with people out of that team who were actually interacting with that mainframe, and what their expectations were from the middleware that they are interacting with. So with all this spectrum of knowledge that we gathered over I think 1 or 1.5 months, then we started to formalize something called a middleware automation strategy / test strategy, where we actually drew the boxes, and where we actually said, okay, this part is called the intermediary bus, which handles this. So that, I think that was the first time when we actually pictured the whole thing and put everything in the boxes where they were meant to. And talking to these people actually helped us a lot in understanding how we are actually building, what are our constraints, what we can do, what we can't do. So there was a talk of mocking the whole SORs, which was never envisioned by people. Like, okay, this is the SOR, this is how we are going to do it, and that is the only way that we have. So that's how rigid the people's
I
overall
think
vision was.
just to pick on that, there's accidental complexity coming into that, isn't there? Because although you might not need the SOR, if your approach brings in SORs, I think you've mentioned the examples. We've got a Unisys mainframe that doesn't just cost money to actually transact with, but actually to stand that up takes a lot of time. To fill it up with the right data takes a lot of time. Again, you've got a SAP core bank that again takes a hell of a lot of time to stand up, and they're probably shared, right? So you're bringing in a lot of extra complexity that, in order to prove what you need to prove, did you even need it? And, a lot of the time that was questionable, right?
Yes, and apart from the cost which were involved in actually standing it up and actually doing it, like you mentioned, the data overlap would have been very much of a possibility. So, for example, your test case needed a very specific type of account, which had 2 holders, 3 holders, and then you had all surrounding ecosystem for it. That might just be gone in a second, because somebody else might have just used that account and even terminated that account, because it's in a shared instance. But in those days, we came up with a reserved number philosophy where, okay, this team is going to use this numbers to this numbers in this short code. So that short code is reserved for automation. Nobody else uses it. So, but up to a certain extent, it is effective, or up to a certain extent, you can keep following up with people if they're still using it. But as and when people leave, as and when people come back to the teams, it's very hard to manage those kind of things. So at the end of the day, it's a human behavior, right? What you don't know is it's there. So
you make an interesting. It's almost good enough, right? But it's too expensive. It's too slow, and it's building up more technical debt, which means it's only going to get slower and more expensive.
Yeah.
And, in an organization that's not trying to transform itself to agile, it's almost going the wrong direction, right? And we're talking about middleware technology. A lot of that is there to expedite, but it's not.
Yes.
And therefore something is wrong.
Yes. And
I mean, just on that one, I mean, test matching or, data allocation, all that kind of stuff. I mean, Rich and I basically worked there to build out this ability to, we basically took away this idea of specific accounts. They just didn't exist. We just said, give us the criteria, and then we have technology which says, I'm about to run this test. Could be a manual test, could be an automated test. Give me the criteria and I will go in the background and I will give you an account number. And in automation, we just give that account number. Is this going to be a read-only transaction? Or as you said, it's I want to lock it. So these 3 accounts are mine and no one else can use them. And that was using tools and automation to solve the people problem. Because the people problem was just constant. And people were just tripping over each other all the time. And, it's literally like 23 people trying to go through a revolving door all at the same time. Just didn't work. So that's why just having a really simple, well, it wasn't really simple, it's quite complicated in the background, but from the user point of view, it's very simple. You just basically do this analysis. And I think that comes back into the model-based testing. So when you are designing your models, any kind of path or block, you need to also model in the criteria that are required for this block to go down this. Every decision gate is going for a data reason. And if you can map that to your test matching or your data allocation or whatever, then that then is another reason to use model-based testing, because it's formalizing your thinking and extrapolating it and making you think a little bit harder. I mean, the classic, which we've mentioned before on the podcast, is 1,000 automated test cases suddenly stop working because someone added one test case and that sent the manager on holiday, and then all the other tests were using that manager to approve all the holidays. So that then basically we went from one failure to 999 failures. And I mean, I think that's a different way of thinking, and I think that's probably the first route where you actually say to people, look, you in the old days it was systems analysis, analyze what you're doing. Don't just do, and don't just hack, and don't just do what you did before. Always be looking for structure and thinking of things in a more sort of mathematical way. Coming back to the old story about coverage, if you can do that, then getting to much greater coverage is actually really straightforward, because you pulled out 7 attributes. Well, let's look at the coverage we've got in there, and as we talked about again before, you're lucky to get 10 to 15% if you just leave it to humans to do it. And of course, model-based testing will design the test cases for you as well.
I think you've hit the nail on the head in terms of analysis, and I think modeling became the vehicle to do that analysis, right? And we're not talking about analysis as an individual, we're talking about collective analysis to get a group understanding of how it should work, or actually how we don't know how it works. And I think once you've done that, you have flexibility, right? I think to your point around you can do test matching to get data when you do need to interact with an SOR. I think what we were trying to strive for, especially in middleware, because I think middleware lends itself to this, if you can isolate a service on its own, then can you get to the nirvana of a regular expression rather than ever needing the data? Because the data will never go off then, right? And if you can isolate it as much as possible, then you can work in that and almost not do away with the data problem, but you've encapsulated the data rule right where the test is. And does it get any better than that? In its isolated fashion, right? There are broader considerations, I guess, to that. What I was going to ask you, obviously, one of the big challenges whenever we talk about automation or modeler or modeling is education, skills, training, etc., etc. But I think touch on that, because I know that you're a large driver of upskilling capability in that area, not just to test, but broader than that. But I also think a large part is mindset.
Yeah.
And again, I think one of the things that you were very good at was not being scared to ask questions that other people historically probably weren't.
Yeah. And thank you for acknowledging that. Yeah, because I remember all the town halls that used to happen, and I was the only one putting my hand up first to ask any question. But that was something that also concerned me at the same time, that people are slightly, I don't know if they're afraid or if they're just afraid to be embarrassed. It's very hard to make that difference sometimes. But yeah, I mean, I guess I never had that fear of embarrassment at all. I was okay. I was okay to be looked at what a stupid question that is. But yeah, I mean, I was internally fine with that, and I was quite okay people calling me stupid. But I at least got my internal curiosity done. So at least I can go home and sleep.
For the record, I don't think anyone did that.
I was fortunate enough to have that, but yeah, I mean, in my first organization, there were a couple of instances where it happened. Like I actually questioned the head of HR directly for some things, and they just wanted to just wrap it up and then, okay, here it is, you go, that's it. So that's how it happened. But yeah, I mean, I think that incident actually just threw away that fear of embarrassment. And I'm always a big proponent of asking questions. It doesn't matter what people think. It's what you get the satisfaction out of that answer or not. And if you don't, then let's chase it further down. And I think this particular way of looking at things really helped me along the way, even on the people side, like bonding with people and making those good interactions across the teams. I think this particular characteristics really helped me, because I used to just sit next to the developers and then just see what they're doing, or just get my query and stay there till they're available and I can ask my question. So that sort of, I won't say persistence, but that quality actually also helped me in getting the right answers, in getting the right people together, and also the way we wanted to share the knowledge, and the way you helped set up all those lunch and learns in Nationwide. You were a big influencer in getting people to that to those meetings. So I remember a lot of people from payments coming along, a lot of people from other SAP group coming along. So I think your network also helped us propagate that idea to all the people. So yeah, I mean, that whole networking thing that we were doing really helped people to understand where we were coming from and what we are trying to achieve. And I think people resonated more because they saw the gaps, and they saw how we actually filled those gaps using that approach. And they were really keen to jump on it because they also wanted that in their area, and they wanted to get rid of all that inconsistency, all that unpredictability. So they wanted more predictable results in their area as well, which we achieved in the middleware section. So I think that was one of the key driver why it actually was able to spread across so many teams, and was able to get the success that we had. Even eventually, I think even designers agreed that they'll start documenting their design in the model tool that we had. So yeah, I mean, it was a fantastic journey. We did accomplish a lot in that area. One funny story is before actually doing this in the data matching, we were having really hard time because the other SAP team was also managed by some other vendor, and the vendor clashes are always there, right? So the cooperation was slightly lower on that side, but we still made our allies there. And then I think Game of Thrones was quite big at that time, so we took the whole Lannister side on our side, that if you see any account with Lannister name, don't use it. That's the criteria we had for data matching at that time. So you can use any other account you want, but don't use the Lannisters. Lannisters belong to us, so don't use it. So that's how we did the matching part until we came across the tool. and we did a lot of fantastic things. I think we generated a lot of things out of one model that we had. I remember we used to generate stubs. We used to generate even the PDF documents. We used to generate automation scripts out of it. We used to generate 2 set of automation script which would run in 2 different tools. Yeah, I mean, there were a lot of things that we were able to achieve from one single asset that we developed. Yeah,
Actually, while I've got you, just, I mean, let's just talk about the SIs a little bit, because we've spoken, Rich and I have spoken that about. I mean, okay, let's just talk about, it sounds like you had a very good relationships with the SI, or a structured one anyway, where, things worked. I mean, I've seen a lot where it doesn't work. You sort of talked about it because SI to SI, which is always an interesting dynamic, because they're always trying to steal each other's bread and milk. So that's one problem. But then also the search for billable hours, a bit like being a lawyer, it's just that continuous search for, there's that dynamic of, well, if we do that, we're going to finish earlier, which drives me up the wall, because there's always an infinite amount of work and you should just be trying to do your best. So maybe you two could just discuss a little bit the dynamics between how you saw a good interaction with, a major SI, and, the customer.
Maybe Rich can cover the customer side. Yeah.
So I think there was always a bit of get off my land, if that makes sense, in terms of, I think Gunesh mentioned there in that certain partners was deemed to be supporting different areas. But and this goes into testing, I think, in that what I think we possibly struck a balance quite well on is that we had the central capability, be that we changed our names into practice, community of practice, center of excellence. We had a central strategy stroke vision underpinned by modeling that we were expecting everybody to follow. All right. And I think the interesting part of that is it wasn't a stick. It had a carrot to it as well, right? And that actually it was the best way of doing it. It was the most efficient way of doing it. It was the most transparent way of doing things. And I think to the example that Gunesh mentioned there, I think you mentioned you were talking to an SI that possibly was not as friendly as some of the other ones, possibly, but because you had a very structured way of working and a structured interface to them. There's only so many games that they could play, if you like, to the other ones, because you're showing your deck, right? And therefore you're saying, look, this is what we need from you. It's very clear. It's very transparent. If you're not almost responding to us, it's because you're playing games, right? And I think this is where we always Nationwide worked with partners rather than kind of, this is your area and it's a black box to us. And therefore there was always that, I call it independence, whereby which if those things did cause friction, then there was always an intermediary to make sure that it didn't fester or get too far. I think that's true in test. Gunesh, I don't know about your kind of experiences of I guess from the inside, there's always going to be those kind of how do we maintain work point.
Like you rightly said, right? I think Nationwide really played a really good role in actually managing all the SIs which are around and the areas that they were working on. So if 2 or multiple SIs are even working in one single functional unit, they were still very collaborative in my experience, because the way I have seen the other accounts or other areas where we have multiple vendors working on the same area, there's a lot of friction in that area. I think the people from Nationwide who were there, they played a very key role in actually managing those expectations. And I think within test, I think majority, except I think 1 or 2 areas, majority was IBM. So that was sort of the internal collaboration that was always there. But again, within the same teams, we also had a lot of lot of friction sometimes because people didn't want to share what they have and then implement in that area. There were a couple of people who actually prohibited that. But yeah.
I do sometimes wonder if it's actually SI fighting or actually the organisational silos that they built up themselves. Because interestingly, you see the same or blue on blue, so to speak, in terms of spats. And therefore, that can only be brought about by the organisational dynamic that is, from the client. Why else would that be there? Going back to the kind of almost the collaborative point and touching on, I think, what you said earlier on, Hugh, around the fact that Nationwide weren't scared to share things outside. And Gunesh also mentioned this collaborative stuff that we did, right? So we were quite big from a centre of excellence point of view of diffusion of innovation, right? By which I can spout, and I do quite a lot, kind of best practice about stuff. But unless you've got practitioners that have actually gone and implemented this stuff, and Gunesh was a great example of this, then how much, you need social proof to be able to expand this. And so we started putting on, it was the Friday show and tell that we did every 2 weeks. And, lockdown might have been good for this, but, it was a virtual thing where, people from, say, all over the world, predominantly UK and India, because that's where our people work from, could join a virtual session that was essentially peers from different teams where they would go and share best practice. All right. So I think that inadvertently, yes, it's sharing best practice, but also this is what good looks like. And therefore it wasn't competition, but I think subtly it's actually, this is where the bar is. And, this is very visual, very visible to people, not just in test, but outside of tests. And so you need to head towards this direction. So, this is better carrot and stick in terms of, we've got the strategy, we've got the vision, these are what you need to be doing. And actually we're showing you practitioners that are doing this thing, problems they've got. But I also think that it created not just this is kind of rose tinted glasses, but this is also the challenges that they're facing, to a certain extent, that psychological safety that we mentioned earlier on around, this area has asked the question. So actually, I should feel safe to ask that question as well, because they did.
Okay, chaps, I think we're kind of running a little short on time here. So probably time to wrap it up. So, Ganesh, you've vanished off screen. Couple of final thoughts, and then I will just wrap it up.
Is his battery gone?
Oh, no, he's back. Okay, Rich.
No. I think
little quick summary. Ganesh, a few last words, and then I'll wrap it up.
From my point of view, I think Gunesh is a great example of provoking change within an organisation. Right, I think lots of organisations stuck in their ways, be them large financial institutions with a lot of debt, or even startups. Right, I'm sure we didn't get into it, but Gunesh is probably experiencing some of the challenges in his newer role as he did in his old role. Right, and I think his kind of mentality, the skills that he's built up, I think liberated tester is quite apt for him in terms of being liberated around, not being constrained by the circumstances that everybody else is. It's a great example of how to create change.
Yeah, I hope I'm still audible, but yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Oh, you're gone again.
We've lost Ganesh. Anyway, I think it was great. Ganesh, thank you so much. Really good to hear you. So, Rich, is that a Swindon shirt?
No, it's orange.
It's not a Swindon. It's orange.
I've got the new Swindon shirt. I'll wear it on the next.
Bring that next time, and I will wear the Wrexham shirt because I've just started to watch Wrexham. So now you're in the same league, and 5-5 must have been one of the greatest games of football that ever was, right?
Yeah, we forced Ben Foster into retirement. Claim to fame that no one will understand.
All right, Ganesh, Rich, thank you so much. Really appreciate
See you
it.
again, Ganesh.
And goodbye, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Why Didn't You Test That podcast. To continue the conversation, head over to curiositysoftware.ie. And don't forget to subscribe for more episodes.